A very good afternoon to you, Sherwin. Thank you so much for coming through. So some people are saying that they're not even sure as to whether they should call it a debate due to the amount of shouting and interruptions and crosstalk between the two candidates and the moderator.
Vanessa, I'm firstly just going to apologize. I have some drilling outside my window, so I hope you and the viewers can hear me clearly. Yeah, some of the descriptions that I've heard is it was a dumpster fire. It was a chaotic presidential debate, not a debate, but a disaster, a bruising debate for the American people. And really, I think a lot of people waking up this morning stumped in the United States as to how this really could happen. This was not a substantive debate about the issues. This was not a conversation with Americans where either nominee was really trying to convince people to come over to their sides. Remember, a lot of American elections are decided by independent voters. So you might have your loyal supporters as Democrats and your loyal supporters as Republicans, but it's the middle that you're trying to convince, those that are equivocating about whether they want to go left or right. And I'm not sure either of the candidates achieved that. But in the main, Donald Trump, the incumbent, is lagging in the polls by up to 10 digits nationally and in a lot of the battleground states, Palesa. And so he had a bigger mountain to climb last night. He really had to convince people that he should win a second term. And based on what we saw there, the level of interruption, the talking over each other, Donald Trump was unable really to resonate or provide a foundational message for why he deserves the second term, either than going on the attack and undermining anything Joe Biden was trying to say. It was ugly television with millions and millions of people watching, so I'm not entirely sure what was really achieved.
Indeed, and I mean, that's my next question as to whether these two candidates really brought anything new to the table for the U.S. voters to think about. What are the takeaways, Sherwin, from this particular debate? As you said, Biden trying to put his points through most of the time, having to turn and address the cameras directly in effort to avoid President Trump's disruptions. But a number of pointers that stood out for you. Some people are talking about him not wanting to condemn white supremacy.
That was certainly an eye-opening remark where moderator, the Fox News' Chris Wallace, asked him if he would go on the record and condemn white supremacy, and he equivocated about how he would do that. And then he said something to the effect of the Proud Boys, which is one of these groups known as the Proud Boys. Quote, "The Proud Boys stand back and stand by." A message to neo-fascists in this country to stand back and stand by as the president's condemnation of what the FBI has said are essentially domestic terrorist groups in this country. So that was a very eye-opening moment, but not necessarily a surprising moment. You'll remember those Charlottesville protests a number of years ago where you had sort of neo-Nazis walking with tiki torches and the president talking and protesters who were protesting these neo-Nazis, and the president then coming out and saying that there were good people on both sides. So this is not a particularly new element. Look, you talk about what was achieved here. I think people are really scratching their heads as to what really the strategy was here from, President Trump, because at times you had Vice President Biden looking completely stunned and overwhelmed by just the amount of interruption he was having to deal with. You had moments where Chris Wallace was asking the president whether he should, swap roles here because he could not control the president. And I was saying earlier on a different show that it's very difficult for us to criticize Chris Wallace because, we work in this industry where we do moderate events from time to time. And it is always going to be very difficult for a lowly journalist to rein in a president that is running amok. So in terms of what Trump needed to do here, Palesa, he needed to close the national gap. He really needed to put out a message that says, this is why I deserve a second term. And here's the problem facing the president. He is running neck and neck, if not running behind Joe Biden in swing states like Ohio, in swing states like Iowa, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Florida. Biden is leading in some conservative states like Arizona, where the late Republican Senator John McCain was, a very popular senator there for 30 plus years. it's difficult to argue in terms of how the president managed to perhaps close those gaps or take the lead here. So he faces a real uphill battle with time running out. Remember, we are just over 30 days away from Election Day. People are already voting in early voting. So it's going to be a very complicated road ahead. If this president doesn't recalibrate come the second debate in a couple of weeks' time.
And I think a lot of people were really looking forward to what Joe Biden really has to say. Some people saying that his delivery was not always forceful, occasionally losing his cool there to President Donald Trump. What sense did you get from the people around there?
Well, he did tell the United States president to shut up, and he called him a clown to his face. I mean, that's very unfamiliar territory for, the empathetic Biden, the person that is known to reach out across the aisle, who can really relate to the pain that people have been going through in terms of the coronavirus tragedy that is unfolding in this country with over 200,000 deaths. This is a former vice president that himself has experienced personal tragedy. He just struggled to articulate his position, and one can say that that's because perhaps he's not very good in debates. Perhaps he was struggling a bit with his stutter and his stammering, but he was also faced with an avalanche of interruption from his colleague to the right, and it was really a brawl. It was not a normal debate where the rules determine that the first speaker gets 2 minutes to make their point, the second speaker then gets 2 minutes, and then there's an open debate where they can kind of go at each other. It was all kind of very messy from the beginning for the 90 minutes. And I think a lot of people are more confused today, or perhaps, it has reaffirmed already entrenched positions. I think it's important for people around the world to understand how an American election works. It's not like in the United Kingdom, where the prime minister calls an election and within 6 weeks you have the conclusion of that election and a new prime minister or a prime minister confirmed. In the United States, the election essentially starts when the last election ends. And so we've kind of been at this for a very long time. So my argument is that American voters have their entrenched positions by this point. There might be a small sliver of the electorate that's undecided. So whether Joe Biden, was able to convey a message or about the future as to where he's going, people have really had a long time to decide which candidate they want to support in this election.
All right, so we know that there are next 2 debates that are scheduled. Do you get a sense that we may be in for the same scenario? Or are we likely to see a different scenario altogether?
Listen, that's a great question, right? There was even talk after last night's debate that Biden would not, you would pull out of the other 2 debates, because the argument is what value does this really bring? If it's just going to be a shouting match. I'll tell you what's going to happen next. On October, I believe the 7th, it's going to be the vice presidential debates, right? So that's the next iteration of this. The other 2 will come later in October, but the vice presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, senator from California, will debate a very timid vice president, really the antithesis of President Trump in Mike Pence. So this will probably be a more cordial discussion. They'll be able to talk more about the substance and the vision that their principals, Trump and Biden, have for this country. So that, I imagine, will be more substantive. But the first debate in a presidential race really does frame where we go from here. Not that many people tune in for the VP debates, although I might argue that in this year, given what we experienced in the first debate, we might see an uptick in the numbers watching that VP debate.
And of course, we understand that the 2 candidates will be returning to their election trails from today on Wednesday. What are we likely to see there?
Well, you're likely to see more Trump campaigns with no social distancing and not many masks in the open, and a Democratic candidate that has really followed the science and the public health experts on how campaigning needs to happen, essentially in the midst of an international public health emergency, no less here in the United States, that has the highest death toll and the highest number of infections anywhere in the world. So that will be the strategy here. You know, Joe Biden has been doing a lot of virtual events, as has his vice presidential candidate. But the Trump campaign has opted more for the in-person events where the president really feeds off the crowd and the energy there. So those are likely to continue. And as those super spreader events continue in terms of this pandemic, we will continue to see the number of infections rise, and by virtue of that, the number of deaths increase in the United States.
All right, Sherwin, we thank you so much for the update. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thanks, Palesa.
All right, our U.S. correspondent there live for us via Skype, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, talking about last night's debate between President Donald Trump and, of course, Joe Biden. All right, so we are going to take a quick